I'm Councilmember Rick Cole, and this is City Talk. And so, welcome to the edition for July, where we'll be focusing in on the whole issue of community mental health. And so, my guest today is Carrie Morrison, and we're going to talk about her biography because it's an unusual background for someone in the world of mental health. She's not a clinician, but sometimes it is the clinicians that have a frame that is not what we need to think about community mental health in a holistic way. And so that's really going to be our focus. We'll focus mostly on the issue of the unhoused because that's the most egregious and visible and glaring example of the breakdown of our approach to mental health. But really, we're talking about community mental health today. So Carrie was for many years the executive director of the um, uh, Hollywood Business Improvement District. And it was through that work, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that led her to found Heart Forward LA, which is a remarkable catalytic combination of think tank and policy advocacy organization that's really had a remarkable ability to bat above its weight because of Carrie's contacts and her passion and advocacy. So, Carrie, let's start with this unusual path for you to begin, for you to focus in on mental health as an area of your career.
Rick, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation this evening, and I always enjoy talking with you and enjoy coming to your classes and meeting with your students. And yeah, I'm excited always to share the story of how I landed in this space. You're right. I managed Hollywood Boulevard from the time that the economic development story started in late 1996. And we rode the curve up through back in the days when we had a very active community redevelopment agency, and we had local leaders who really believed in revitalization of the downtown area in Hollywood, because that would not only bring businesses back and jobs, but contribute to one of the economic engines of Los Angeles. And I would say it was probably around the early part of the 21st century, 2005, 6, that our population of people experiencing homelessness started to kind of trickle into the mainstream, into the downtown area. It was minuscule compared to what we have right now.
Mhm.
And I remember my board, they said, we're a business improvement district. This is not improving business to have this happening. And for a while, for a couple of years, I, would venture out, who's supposed to solve this? Is it supposed to be PATH? Is it supposed to be the city? Is it supposed to be the faith community? And long story short, we ended up forming a coalition in Hollywood. I worked with service providers, business community members. We call it Hollywood Forward. This was about 2008 when the situation was becoming more challenging. And that coalition exists to this day. But my personal portal into the dysfunctional mental health system was a man by the name of Tori. And there's actually a 5-minute documentary on my website about this. He had been sitting at the corner of Cahuenga in Hollywood for about 8 months, rocking back and forth on a bus bench, and would rarely venture more than a block in either direction, hadn't bathed. He was incredibly scary, smelled really bad. And I finally thought, who is this guy? Like, I'm going to go talk to him, right? So that became the Tori story. It took me a couple days. I approached him. I was very scared. And I always say, when I started this, I was very scared. I didn't know if he was going to jump up, if he was going to hit me. He was rocking back and forth. And I found that when I gave him my name and I got his name, something shifted. Like when we connected with the name, after 3 days, I came back and said, hey, do you remember me? Do you remember my name? He goes, yeah, you're Carrie. And I said, what is your
Mm,
name? He said, I'm Tori. And
mm,
everything shifted. And
mm,
that informed from that point on this kind of like desire to know who is homeless here, like who are these people? And he became my portal into a system that had neglected him for a long, long time. Um, One of my favorite stories was probably, well, I worked with Path. We insisted on getting him a shower and a
A word
hamburger.
about PATH because PATH doesn't operate in Pasadena, and so people may not be familiar with that acronym.
People assisting the homeless who had an active outreach team at that time. I said, let's try to get this guy a shower. It took us about 2 months to develop the trust to do that.
Hmm.
Um, so I learned from these gifted outreach workers about how it was important to build trust and rapport. But I think that the kind of the realization that the system was broken for me running a bid was he had gone missing for a couple months and nobody knew where he was. And then one day I saw him at the corner of Hollywood and Vine, and he was completely lucid. He was clean, shaved, his hair was cut, he had new clothes, and he had a big bag with big bottles of psych meds.
Yes.
And he was released to the corner of Hollywood and Vine to back into homelessness. And that's when I called up the Department of Mental Health and I said, hello, what the heck? And that started the journey for me to, through the lives of people, to document and elucidate the dysfunctional system.
I just had my cat walk across the screen, so I had to remove him from the distraction. So that was a very personal story, and that is the entry for many people into this world is personal stories of friends or relatives. But when we talk about public policy, we have to obviously move beyond anecdote and personal story. And you made that journey. So how did that work?
So Tori was the portal, but then, as things started to continue to get worse in Hollywood, I remember in 2013, we pulled together a group of people. It was some of the service providers, the local Hollywood Presbyterian Church, who was very active, the LAPD, who had a very robust homeless outreach deputy or officer. We had our bid security, and we did a whiteboard session on what we called the Hollywood Top 14. These are the 14 people who were most likely to die on the streets of Hollywood unless there was some intervention. We all agreed on who those people were because we saw them every day. And we decided to collaborate and partner together to find out who were these people, where did they come from, how did they get here, where is their family, what kinds of interactions have they had with the system. And notably, the group that would not come to the table was the Department of Mental Health. We asked them, would you come to the table with us? We cannot be there because of HIPAA, which is the privacy law, right? So we did it all on our own and began to isolate the top few people on the list and surround them. Now, I did not do the heavy lifting. We had gifted folks who did outreach and work in the directly on the streets, but I kept all the notes about who these people were. We would have LAPD say something like, oh, this person has been arrested 10 times in the last year, just FYI, has been hospitalized, left out of the hospital after a few hours. So we just started to gather the notes and to then find our voice for the system dysfunction that we could discuss with the county, we could discuss with the media. We could help those people. Some of them died. But
Mm.
eventually, a couple years later, I was encouraged to apply for a Stanton Fellowship, which is this marvelous program offered by the Durfee Foundation in Los Angeles. And they give you 2 years and $100,000 to spend time away from your job to explore an issue that would improve the quality of life in Los Angeles if you were free to do that. And I took the learnings from the Hollywood Top 14, and I said, um, I need to find out who's doing this better and see if I can bring those ideas back to Los Angeles because this situation is growing more dire in Hollywood. And Nobody argued with that. So I was awarded a Stanton Fellowship. I had 2 years to go in search of something better. And I spent the first year, learning about the mental health system, reading about deinstitutionalization in America and John F. Kennedy's vision, and we were supposed to have a network of community-based mental health clinics all throughout the country, and why that didn't happen. Learned about NAMI, went to other cities, and again, you pointed out, I
Of course,
didn't.
there's the urban legend, Carrie, that it's all Ronald Reagan's
Yeah,
fault.
I
And
know.
so you might say a word about debunking that myth. Not that Reagan is faultless, but certainly he was part of a national effort, which these visions were, as you point out, John Kennedy and the state. So, what role did Ronald Reagan play in all that?
Well, yeah, if only it were that simple to be able to point the finger at one person. But I think what we saw in the country and in California was a desire by the federal government and then ultimately the state government to not be responsible for this issue and to not provide the care and the access to the continuity of care that one would need if they were to be truly released from a hospital, from an asylum, whatever you want to call it, into a community. And one of the fatal flaws that I think happened in the state of California, and this evolved from Reagan's time moving forward, is eventually the state dissolved its Department of Mental Health and disaggregated all power and authority to the 58 counties. So every county now administered their own mental health system without any kind of state oversight or state accountability. So it was a gradual devolution of authority and a kind of control and responsibility at the federal government, to states, down to our counties. It's a complicated falling apart.
Yeah. And so that led you in the Durfee Foundation work to Italy.
It led me to Italy in the second year. I was kind of disillusioned because I hadn't really I found pockets of bright spots, right? I went to Miami-Dade County. I learned about NAMI. I visited Fountain House in New York City. I saw bright spots in the country, but they were not woven together in any way. And I was going to go to Giel, Belgium, because I had been told that there
Hmm.
was something noteworthy happening there. But then I was told by a woman, Linda Kaufman of Synergy, you need to go to Trieste, Italy. That is the North Star for the world.
Hmm.
And I changed my travel plans and I arrived there in July of 2017. And it's a small town. It's a 250,000. It's not tiny, but it's a small region near Slovenia. And indeed, maybe because it's kind of a protected bubble, when they closed their asylums in the late 70s and 80s, they built a community system of care to absorb people back into the community. And they deeply believe in the human right to work and purpose, the human right to housing, the fundamental human rights that we don't necessarily even believe in the United States. And I remember following a psychiatrist around that day, and we went to the central hospital in that city and visited the psychiatric wing, which had 6 beds in an unlocked ward. They do not use restraints. People could leave if they wanted to, but they didn't. The beds were not full. And I was like, wow, how do they do this? And
Hmm.
the way they do it is they don't let people get so sick.
Hmm.
It's early intervention. It's like robust connection with teams of people that you come to know and trust, and they avoid the downward spiral that is so evident in our system today.
So obviously, you've taken a number of folks to see that, and one of them, John Sharon, is going to be on our um, issue forum coming up in 2 weeks, where we're going to go into more depth on this issue, particularly focusing on Pasadena. Um, but if it's such a great model, Carrie, why hasn't it caught on even in Italy or Europe, let alone 6,000 miles away in a city like Los Angeles?
And you're right. The fidelity to that model is probably best preserved in Trieste. There's people
Mhm.
make pilgrimages to go there and to see it in action.
Mhm.
And in fact, when I came home from that trip, I realized I was very depressed, actually. I thought, my gosh, I have seen the promised land. No one is going to believe me. I run a business improvement district.
Mm.
I have
Mm.
no portfolio, I have no standing. So a month or so later, I heard about an international conference in Trieste that the World Health Organization was co-sponsoring. And I still had time left in my fellowship and I had some funds left in my grant. And I didn't know Dr. Sharon, but I called him up. I said, hi, my name is Carrie Morrison. I run the Business Improvement District on Hollywood Boulevard. I just saw this thing in Trieste. I think you need to see it. I think we need to bring some people back to see this. And you can ask him this story as well, but he basically said, I remember learning about that in medical school. I agree. Let's put a group together. And we took 12 people back in a couple that later that year in November to go to a conference and see it and feel it viscerally. And people were gobsmacked.
Mm.
So that led to Dr. Sharon, asking us to work for the next year to imagine what a pilot might look like that would be
Mhm.
influenced and inspired by the Trieste model in Los Angeles.
So let's talk about scale. Um, this was a community of 250,000, which is, significantly larger than Pasadena. So it's not a small community. On the other hand, there are 75,000 unhoused people in Los Angeles. Um, I'm sure you're daunted every day by the scale, and yet you persist in believing that there are better ways for us to handle this almost existential crisis of homelessness and mental health. And those are, let's take a step back. Um, what is your sense of, and often it's framed in percentages, which is probably misleading because it's not like mental illness can be pinned down to an exact diagnosis. But I've seen statistics from 25% of folks are suffering from significant symptoms of mental illness to 75 and 80%, and claims, of course, of people who are not particularly informed of it's 100% of them. Um, so what's your sense? And it may vary from community to community.
Yeah, so clearly, managing Hollywood, I served on the LAHSA Commission for 5 years or so, participated in every homeless count. And when I would see the numbers that would come out of the LAHSA demographic survey, which was somewhere around 25%-ish, I was just like, really? Now, part of the problem with the LAHSA demographic survey, the way it was always conducted, it was a self-report, right? So it was a follow-up survey, and you'd walk up to somebody and say, I need, do you have a mental illness? Do you have a substance use addiction, et cetera. So I tend to believe it's much higher. And it was certainly what we witnessed in Hollywood, and I think what we witness on the streets today, including and entwined with substance use disorder, which I think has gotten worse. LA County Jail, where I volunteer, 49% of the inmates have a serious mental illness. So this is a this is kind of the existential crisis we have. Yes, people are losing homes, they're living in their cars, they're being evicted, but there is this cohort of people who have serious and persistent untreated mental health conditions and substance use that we are struggling to reach, continuing to struggle.
And my anecdotal sense also is that living out on the street is a precursor to developing those kind of symptoms. That if you live out on the street and are in constant um, fear of being hassled, being assaulted, being robbed, and certainly on an hourly basis being disrespected and dehumanized, that it's not unusual or not surprising, probably a better word, for people to develop those kind of, or for those to become, as you were saying, so much worse in going untreated. So let's go back to Trieste and try to link. How do you scale a pilot in a county of 10 million people, bigger than I think 36 states or some number like that, and 75,000 folks out on the street? Again, by no means all of them suffering from mental illness, but a significant portion either helping push them out onto the street or having developed as a result of being out on the street. How do you get your arms around a problem of that scale? And do you have to rethink mental health, period? Or is there a way for this to be applied specifically to this problem of the unhoused?
So the challenge in the United States is that our systems of how services are paid for are incredibly fragmented and siloed, right? So the difference in Italy is you do have a national healthcare
Mm,
system,
mm,
and they have a very specific budget to work with. So when you have a per capita budget, the last thing you want to do is blow the budget on hospitalization. It would be far better to use the budget to help people stay safe and enjoy a good quality of life in their apartment. Dr. Sharon, to his credit, he knew this, and it's called a capitated system, right? Where you have a limited amount of money to spend per person. And when we were imagining the pilot for LA County, he turned to Dr. Dave Pilon, who was the architect of a very famous 3 or 4 year demonstration pilot in Long Beach in the 90s at the Village, where they
mhm,
had a very specific budget of $15,000 per person for about, I think, 250 people to spend per year, all
mhm,
in. And they were able to do exactly what you would do if you had a limited budget: avoid hospitalization and try to address the issues before it becomes a crisis. And I did a wonderful podcast with Dave Pilon and Mark Reagans, who was the chief psychiatrist at that time. It's not rocket science. I think Dr. Reagans points out there a person who was in crisis, where under a normal method, you would have 5150 them into the Long Beach hospital. Instead, they bought a pizza and got one of their peer workers to hang out with the person that night until the crisis abated, and the next day, he could move on. And they
mm,
also built trust and rapport within the team
mhm.
in Long Beach. So
For
that
many people, although I suspect there's a certain amount of self-selection among the people who are tuning in today, but for many people that I encounter, they would say, "Oh, that sounds all great, but you live in a la-la world." Most of the people that I see screaming, and then the reports I read or hear on Fox News of people with box cutters and people assaulting folks and all of that. Um, you're not going to solve that with a box of pizza. Um, what about that overlap now, not just between the unhoused, but also between the incarcerated and the mentally ill? The Chicago district attorney, or I guess the Chicago sheriff, I should say, embarked some years ago on an effort with similar statistics in their men's jail of half the inmates suffering from some version of mental illness on a pretty ambitious program. It has not proven to be as easy a solution as he had hoped. He's done a lot of reforms, but it's still expensive, and you run up against entrenched practices and bureaucracy.
so there's a number of responses that I have to that. Of
Mhm.
course, we're not going to emulate Trieste, in LA or in any American city. And the capitated model that was originally baked into the Trieste pilot that was approved by the state, that was removed,
Hmm.
which was unfortunate. But I still
Mhm.
think we need to test that, and maybe we need to
Mhm.
test it in a smaller locality. So
Mhm.
where I landed, like, what is Carrie Morrison? How does Carrie keep this flame alive? What did I witness in Trieste that is worth emulating here? And it's a cultural way of coming alongside people. In the American system, we have a lot of power dynamics and hierarchies that clinicians and, you know, people with credentials have all the answers, and they're clinical answers that are dispensed in a very short period of time. What's different about the Italian system is the community engagement and the
Mm,
inclusion
mm,
of
mm,
community in a person's recovery and
mhm,
talking about recovery as a real thing. We don't talk
mm,
about recovery here. We talk about stabilizing and, you know, stabilizing, medicating to the point of stabilization without having a conversation like, hey, would you like to go back to college? Would you like
mm,
to get a job? Do you ever
mm,
think you might get married someday? Like
mm,
reinstating, reclaiming a person's aspirations to be a whole person. In America, I would say we almost, if you have a mental health diagnosis as a young person, the system has kind of said like, wow, your life is over. That is absolutely not the case in Trieste. And so I've defined that as radical hospitality, which
mhm,
is it's like a four-prong cultural way of coming alongside people in horizontal ways. So even if you have your PhD or your psychiatrist or LCSW, when you're coming alongside a person that you're serving, you are fellow human beings, and the power dynamic is diminished. So radical hospitality is four things. We see you, we
mhm,
really give you eye contact. We see you,
mhm.
we hear you, we are really listening. You are safe here, and your voice matters. You have agency. So I talk to people all the time who are, in our system, and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, I had 10 minutes with a psychiatrist and they want to put me on this med and I don't like the med. I don't like the way it makes me feel, makes me bloated or makes me amped up but I can't get back in to see the psychiatrist for another couple of weeks and I think I'll just stop taking my meds." Those are the kinds of things that's not radical hospitality. Like you're not hearing the person, you're not offering them agency to work something out that's going to be better for them. So the Italians talk about this notion of relentless negotiation, where you're in a partnership with your client. They don't call them clients, system user, to find the path forward that they can feel good about and that they feel that you've seen them and that your voice matters to them. It's hard in our system for some reason for people to find the time to do that or to be empowered to do that. I have found,
There's also, Carrie, I would argue, and I'll let you finish, a political dimension to this, but we'll come back to that. What have you found?
so I have found another missing link in the American system is allowing community people like me and others, and including family, friends and family, to be actively involved in the team that surrounds a person. Um, let's go back to Tori. It wasn't until the Hollywood 2.0 pilot came, and I've known Tori since 2008, and he's living in a board and care home right now in Hollywood. None
Mhm.
of his psychiatrists would ever talk to me. I would go camp out in the lobby because I noticed something was off with Tori. He was, something seemed off with his meds, and they would not talk to me. Essentially, I was the only person on the planet Earth that even knew he existed. So, we have to be more open to expanding the role of family members, friends, and community members to be in support. It'll take the burden off of the clinical workforce. They don't have to carry this burden all by themselves.
Political dimension that I've encountered frequently, as in so many of the stereotypes of the right and the left in our society as being polar opposites and having nothing in common. Um, when it manifests here, it's not just that binary between the professional clinician and the amateur community, but it's also the binary between the left, which not all, but a very vocal and strident contingent of folks on that side of the spectrum will view people as victims, will focus on their human rights, and grant them agency, but agency that they actually lack because of the psychosis that they're suffering from. And then on the right, an equally vocal and strident contingent will say, you have to stand up on your own 2 feet. That's the American way. If you're seriously sick, we'll put you away somewhere. Um, but not a sense of actually all this other stuff that you're talking about is a bunch of government and naive mumbo jumbo that people who commit crimes ought to go into jail. People that are sick ought to go to hospitals, and if they don't want to go to hospitals, we ought to restrain them and keep them in the hospital where we won't have to think about them anymore. And that again, that is not all the people on the right, all the people on the left. There are a lot of rational, thoughtful, caring people who understand the nuances, but often they are drowned out by very vocal and strident voices that basically see nothing in common, and it's a dialogue of the deaf, and that perpetuates the reality that we can't go to both and. It's either or. Either people stand on their own 2 feet, and if they don't, well, some church will take care of them, particularly if they find God. Or the government will take care of you because you have no agency, but we'll leave you out on the street because you don't want to come in. And we are not creating environments that are welcoming to bring people off the street. And again, some folks, some strident voices on the right will say, "Whoa, welcome? What right do they have to sleep out on the street?" And that dialogue of the deaf is really difficult, and it seems to stymie any action in Sacramento to find a middle ground.
It's so important that people try to, whatever way they feel comfortable, find the humanity and the people that are falling prey to, whether it's what the left or right is saying. I mean, I would say to people would say to me, how can you be such a proponent of the Trieste model and still support a conservatorship for somebody?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say because nobody would ever have been allowed to get that sick and deteriorate to this level in Trieste. And here, short of dying on the street, if this is the safest way to help someone at least be taken to a safe place, fed, bathed, brought under treatment, and have some sense of recovery. Conservatorships don't last forever, but they are, in my view, a humane opportunity to help someone reclaim their life. Tori was under a conservatorship twice. He's not under it now. And I pleaded with them to please put him under a conservatorship because otherwise I was afraid he was going to die. So you have to, there's someone here in my neighborhood, I become the problem solver. They said, "Carrie, there's a guy, he has set up a camp in front of our house and he is, gathering trash and he's like half naked, and what should we do?" Right. And there's actually not a lot of options right now. And I said, if you feel comfortable, would you think about going out and starting a conversation with him? Find out who he is. Like, did he just get out of the hospital? Has he been in jail? Did he just come on a bus from Omaha? And that's kind of what you need to do, because it's going to knock your socks off when you actually hear about the life that some people have lived and the trauma that has led them to that place. And the person responded, said, "I don't feel comfortable doing that." I said, "Okay, I understand." But that could be a game changer.
Let me shift back to Tori's story, and that he didn't, develop that level of psychosis overnight, and at some point, his family or his other support systems of friends and relatives, and the larger community around him, schools and churches and neighbors and what have you, it can be extremely demanding. We've all known people that have walked this walk with people, and it's like caring for a deeply ill parent or a deeply ill child. It's draining, it's frustrating, it's heartbreaking. Um, and yet, it's clear that in all but a very small minority of cases um, that these symptoms can be avoided, can be mitigated, and as you suggest, ultimately, for many people, there's an opportunity for recovery. Um, so let's talk about the larger framework. One of the things that we're a little bit freaked out about, and I wonder whether you feel the same level of alarm, is the level of alienation and loneliness and addiction to technology that is actually separating so many people from normal human contact. And we go to a restaurant and we order meals increasingly from robots. We go to the grocery store and instead of the person we see week after week after week with a friendly smile, it's self-checkout. Um, we're not having to go to the bank to do transactions. We've got an ATM or we do it online or on our phone. Do you see in this are you alarmed by these larger social trends, and do you think that they are contributing to the glaring symptoms we're actually seeing out on the street?
Absolutely alarmed. And also, I see in this growing realization, whether it's Dr. Murthy talking about the loneliness epidemic in America or the wonderful, I think it was in the Atlantic last year, the antisocial 21st century, where they
Mhm.
actually said
Mhm.
that 70% of restaurant revenues now are from takeout and delivery. People aren't going to the restaurant to actually see people. So this kind of like disintegration of social connection and social support. This is actually where I get the most excited because this is
Mm,
where I think we can make a difference, all of us,
mm, mm,
starting today or starting
mm,
tomorrow.
mm,
um, my nonprofit Heart Forward, we have for the past several years gone into places where people formerly homeless are living. It was always like, hey, let's get someone off the street, housing first, give them a key. They can lock the door. And that is success. They lock the door and they enter a place of great social disconnection. And some people do fine, but a lot of people really have a hard time. And so we have begun to see opportunities. In fact, I'll just share with you the thing I'm most excited about. We used to go to places like PATH and the People Concerned and bring community volunteers into those spaces. We're trying something different now. We are experimenting with a third place in Hollywood. So the
mm,
concept of the third place in America, which
mhm.
they're diminishing, right? Your first place is home, your second place is work, and now the third place was, the shopping mall or the Cheers bar where everybody knows your name. It's a place where you can go, you
Or the
can talk.
Starbucks before it became a drive-through.
Exactly. So third places are exceedingly rare in America, and there's thinking about bringing them back. So we're experimenting with this in Hollywood, where we have access for the next year and a half to a vacant building along with six other nonprofits that's going to be demolished and turned into affordable housing. And we've been starting one day a week, inviting in the people that we used to go to their places and saying, come to this place. We
Mm.
have 4 or 5 rooms on the ground floor of this building. We have a piano, we've got a cello, we've got a guitar, we've got art supplies, we've got knitting supplies. We've got a quiet room where you can just sit and talk. And
Mhm.
we're also inviting in community volunteers.
Well, isn't that the role that libraries have inadvertently and somewhat awkwardly filled? Is it's a place for people not just to go and sleep that's warm or air conditioned, but also it's a place I've seen many times where people sit down and they read and they pull up books from the shelves and they find something to do in the library.
Yeah, we need dozens of third places. We need the Starbucks. We need the church, that has a potluck, or the park, that has activities. So there's no need to limit those options. Maybe the difference between the library and and our third place is you can be noisy, you can laugh, you can, sing and have a good time. What I'm
You're not
finding,
necessarily discomforting the folks who find that the fact that you haven't had a chance to have a shower or that your clothes are ragged makes them uncomfortable and creates again that friction which homeless people being people can quickly pick up on and know when they're encountering that radiating hostility.
what is different about what we're doing is that people who are formerly homeless and are housed are coming. There are many other places in Hollywood that you can go if you are experiencing homelessness, to get a shower, to get food, to get coffee, to get connected to services. This is like what happens later. What happens when the person locks the door and now they're all by themselves and
Mhm.
there is really nowhere to go, no money to go anywhere with. So we are kind of looking at that. What does it look like to flourish once you've been placed in permanent supportive housing or a board and care when you've been homeless for many, many years? This is the gap we're experimenting with filling. And what I love about it is we will have people who are, you know, they're dealing with their own substance use addiction or mental health issues, and community members coming in who are also a little bit isolated in their respective places. So we're building bridges between these kind of diverse cohorts of our community. That's why, the theme I keep wanting to bring up to people is if you don't want to talk to the guy who's on your front lawn, that's understandable. Find other ways to come alongside people who are otherwise marginalized, a bit vulnerable in our society, and let your let yourself be amazed at how interesting people are.
And what about those Tories when they're an awkward teenager, when they're in their early 20s and struggling perhaps with dyslexia or with again, I'm not fluent in all of the various psychological diagnoses, whether it's schizophrenia or bipolar, on and on. How do we reach them and how do we build systems or cultures or mindsets to reach them long before they become radically alienated and are sitting on a bus bench, rocking back and forth in a world under their own? How do we, to that odd-looking person on the bus, that weird person in the class, that lonely person on the park bench. How do we create a different way of incorporating them into our social world?
Yeah, there's a report that was just issued 2 months ago, expanding the mental health care continuum, authored by Dr. Benjamin Miller, who used to be with the Wellbeing Trust and at Stanford. He actually, I'm so excited. I'm going to talk to him in 2 days and see if I might be able to bring him on my podcast. He talks about exactly that, that there are roles for individuals to play in our society. He talks about coaches, barbers, doulas, people who will
Used to be
notice.
bartenders, which is a little bit odd, but yes.
Bartenders. He specifically mentions bartenders as well. So
Right.
he talks about
Today
this
it's
need.
baristas, and that's probably, caffeine's probably not as damaging as alcohol as a self-medication.
So these kind of like first responders, just because they're cutting
Mm,
someone's
mm,
hair or they're
mm,
the
mm,
football coach, are often in a position to notice things and to pick
mm,
up on
mm,
issues that are, concerning, and they're a
mm,
trusted person. He specifically this is a report for philanthropy that encouraged philanthropy to look at how to fund pilots that involve these individual and community inputs. But there's three things: goes individuals, communities, and clinicians. The clinicians need to be wrapped and connected with these other two inputs to create a continuum of care, because the trust and rapport is going to come from the basketball coach or the
mm,
barista.
mm.
Um, we have a friend who is really in a struggling place right now who, about 6, 7 months ago, invited him to a concert at the Hollywood Bowl. And immediately I could tell something was off. I could tell.
Mm,
And and he's been on a really difficult journey since then with struggling with
mm,
bipolar disorder and
mhm.
meth. And if I'd been able to contact his clinical team and say something is off, I know it, and could there be some kind of conversation? Maybe I could be included. I think we could have avoided a whole world of hurt. So this report by Dr. Miller is suggesting we've got to build this continuum so that those early intervention strategies do take place and you don't create a lifetime of just falling through the cracks, ending up in a
So I
in a
assume Dr. Miller is either an academic or a clinician. Let's return to that because neither one of us is anti-clinicians. They play an incredibly valuable role, and their expertise is earned. But like all professions, lawyers, elected officials, government bureaucrats, police officers, even teachers, even firefighters, as beloved as they are, we all come with blinders and professional biases. But Dr. Sharon obviously is a clinician who saw things differently. What's been your dialogue with clinicians? Where have you found common ground? Where have you found friction? And how do we bridge some of that so that we get the best of their professional expertise and specialization, and we overcome some of that professional bias and status?
I I tend to I tend to see hope in the new generation, the younger generation, who probably are witnessing the same social conditions that we all see and recognize that the status quo is not perhaps the horse to ride. I sense
Mm-hmm,
more rigidity in people who have been doing this work for a long time.
mm-hmm,
Um, One, quick story in Hollywood, there was a woman who lived at the corner of Fountain and Highland for years. Her name was Roxanne. She passed away. And we would plead with DMH to send a psychiatrist out to see her, because she was living in squalor.
mm-hmm,
And I remember they said, "Oh, our psychiatrists don't do that. They don't. If she needs to see someone, she needs to come to the clinic." I was like, "Well, that's just not going to happen." Today, that's changed. So that gives me hope,
mm-hmm,
That
mm-hmm,
was 2010-ish.
mm-hmm,
This
mm-hmm.
is 2026. There are street psychiatry teams. There are gifted and committed psychiatrists with LA County DMH and elsewhere in the country. But it's the new generation that I think is going to have to push the envelope for system change.
So I want to wind up and I see actually some I've been neglecting the chat, and so I want to give you a chance to answer while I see if I can pose some of their questions and share some of their comments. But I want to the thing I want to not leave on the table is this stigma that we have about mental illness. It's longstanding, deeply embedded in our culture. Um, when people are sick, that's some people recoil from physical sickness and seeing those symptoms, but there's such a deeper recoiling away from people who are suffering from those. Um, you've dealt with that in yourself, in the work you're doing. What's the what are your thoughts about how we begin to overcome that long-standing barrier that we've imposed on treating people as human beings despite what's going on inside them?
I just go back to being open and curious about who that human being is, and you know, finding ways to be in a situation where you can have a conversation with someone. I sit with guys in the jail all the time who are in the pods. They're the most vulnerable at LA County Jail. I always start at the very early part of their life because I know that something really must have gone seriously wrong. That's why they're there. but everybody has kind of like a pretty happy first grade story. So like, where were you born? Where did you go to school? What was elementary school like? Just trying to create that connection and a happier time. Um, and not pushing it too quickly, coming back again the next time and continuing the conversation. I think that's the only way stigma can be addressed is you have to be willing to confront it. You know, not everybody is going to want to do that. But if you want to have your own personal life changed and your views about some of these issues, you really do have to hear a person's story. And it has to go, just going back to the jail thing, I never ask people, it may take an hour to say, and how did you end up here?
Mhm.
Like, let's really dive into who you are as a person, what you like, where you came from. Yeah,
So
yeah.
someone who's actually done exactly that is one of our participants, Sonia Burnt. And she says, what about a community ally program? If government won't pay for sufficient case managers to support radical hospitality, perhaps retired folks, if you paid them minimal sums, could develop relationships with persons suffering from mental illness, a kind of paraprofessional approach. What's your reaction to that?
I love that idea. I was sitting at Pete's a couple of weeks ago on Larchmont and kind of overhearing these two people, and they were talking about how bored they were in their retirement. I got the sense one might have been a screenwriter and something else, and they were just like, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my day. And I felt like I hope to see them again. Like, I have an idea. I have a place you can come and hang out with folks,
Hmm.
you know? So yes, that's a great idea. Sonia, let's talk about it. Because, that loneliness epidemic is crossing socioeconomic strata. It's, I always will say like Friday is when we do our third place here in Hollywood, and I'm usually pretty exhausted and it's been a long week. I'm like, okay, I'm heading over there. And 100% I walk away feeling life, like new life by hanging out with people and just letting life happen. So love that idea.
Robert Bailey asks or comments, I've been on Facebook a lot lately, too much. And from the posts I'm seeing that are so intolerant, I believe, excuse me, I believe these social media platforms are not healthy. I find people say things online they would never say if they were meeting people with differing viewpoints. Um, I think we've all noticed that the society is waking up to that, and yet people are making billions of dollars and are exercising more and more power um, uh, and exploiting the fact that um, it brings out the worst of people. And it is almost addictive for people to become online warriors.
Yeah. No, it's so I think the theme we keep talking about is it's got to be human to human contact. It's got to see you. I've got to be able to be in your presence and put the phone aside and suspend your uh, judgment about what you think this person might be all about until you actually know from whence they came. So maybe
Mhm.
if it is an addiction, which it certainly seems to be social media and endlessly scrolling, uh, we can all. Well, I'll just tell you one very quickly. I have already interviewed for my podcast a man from Canada who's done research on mattering, like the importance of mattering, and that you need to know that you matter to people and that other people matter to you. And as we talked through that podcast, I said, the call to action is today, tonight, even after this YouTube we're on together, you could send a text to somebody that you're thinking about and say, "Hey, how you doing?
Mm,
I miss
mm,
you."
mm, mm,
That sends
mm,
a message to that person. Oh my gosh,
mm.
Carrie, I must matter to Carrie.
Yeah.
And then you feel better. It's a reciprocal thing. So we can we can turn the arc away from this dehumanization in the social media world and do something more human, all of us.
IRL, as young people say, in real life, go touch grass is one of their mantras.
Mhm.
It reminds me of my definition of community. Community is a place where they notice when you're born and they care when you die. And that is increasingly elusive in our society. I want to thank everyone who's participated in our little virtual community here this evening.
Mhm.
Um, Carrie, as you know, I've walked this journey with some folks. Uh, Sometimes I don't talk about it because I don't want to sound like I'm talking about being a savior to anyone. But sometimes I do feel like I need to share it because it's been so enriching to me. My friend Ed is in a board and care, actually not board and care. He's in a convalescent home in San Gabriel now, and I've walked the journey with him now for 10 years. Probably 90% of that time he's been housed, but the 10% have been terrifying, where because he's an alcoholic, um, there are times when he has walked out of situations that weren't terrific. So I sympathize with him. Um, but of course, it was far worse out on the street, and a couple times he's nearly died, and that's why he's in a convalescent home now. And I remember just one of the most searing and um, powerful lessons I've learned in my life was one day I was giving him a well-intentioned, at least in my view, lecture on the evils of alcohol, um, and uh, and telling him, Ed, this has ravaged your life. You have a college degree, had a family, you had a son, um, and now you have all of that is you've lost. And he just looked at me without any judgment, without any rancor. He just said, Rick, you haven't lived the life I've lived.
Mm.
And there wasn't a whole lot I could say to that. Um, and Ed is still a good friend, right? He gets
Mhm.
me a birthday present, oh, I got this birthday present. You got to come see me. I matter to him, and he matters to me, and so
Mhm.
I think that is like that story about the child, apocryphal as it is, on the beach that throws the starfish back into the water, and his grandfather says, "That's there's thousands of starfish. Well, it's not going to matter that you're never going to be able to save them all." And he says, but yeah, I saved one. And out of there's 10 million people here and 75,000 people out on the street. They're not all mentally ill. And
Right.
those are certainly not all the mentally ill people who are on the street. We may have one in the White House. Um, but, uh, but, um, but we all can make a difference. And I know that many of the people on the call are doing just that. Hopefully we can spread that word and inspire others. 2 weeks from now, 7 o'clock, the third Tuesday is our issue forum. If two of our panelists are confirmed, Dr. April Duncan is a clinician here in a community-based clinic, and also Dr. Sharon will be joining us, former director of the county mental health system. And we have a third panelist, not yet confirmed, but lined up. So I hope to see all of you and spread the word. If this has been useful, welcome your feedback, and look forward to our. We're going to go dark in August on both City Talk and our issue forum, but I hope to see you in 2 weeks at Jefferson School at 7 p.m., 1500 East Villa, or also we have an online option as well. Carrie, thank you so much, not just for the generous hour you've spent with us, but mostly for your generous spirit. It is inspiring and deeply, deeply appreciated.
Thanks, Rick. I always enjoy talking about these things that matter to me, and thank you for the forum. And I will listen in 2 weeks. That sounds like it's going to be a great session, and I always love hearing what Dr. Sharon is working on.
We'll be shifting a little bit more to some of the trauma of the Eaton fire, more about young people and the elderly. We will touch on mental illness and homelessness, but that's part of a much larger picture. We're only one of 3 cities in all of California that have our own health department. And so for 100 years, Pasadena has viewed well-being and community health and public health as a local responsibility. And I want to build on that tradition, that legacy, and that opportunity. Thank you all, and
Excellent.
have a very pleasant good evening.
Thanks. Bye, Rick.